Hey, Jack, is this on? Ladies and gentlemen, by the way, I have one other really quick announcement. Um, Over the last year, the City Council of Cleveland honored us by sort of unofficially, officially, however they say it, renaming East 8th Street, this little alley behind us, City Club Way. On Wednesday the 9th at 2 o'clock, if you'd like to join us outside for a brief ceremony and hot cocoa and cider, we're going to have a little ceremony out there with Councilman Simperman. So if you happen to be walking by and you see that, stop over there, and we'll have some cider and all that for you. Okay? Thank you.
I got it. Trust me, buddy. I do. And the clock. All right. I will. Hmm? I know, right? Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is John Litton, as Dan said, Executive Director of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Donna Beagle. But not yet. Before I do, I want to speak briefly about why I am here and why we sought to bring Donna here. St. Vincent de Paul is celebrating 150 years serving the poorest among us in Northeast Ohio through things like emergency help with rent, utilities, clothing, and food. We run some of the largest food pantries in Northeast Ohio. And one of the things that makes our society most unique is this thing called home visits. So when someone calls us for help, we do our best to come into their homes, meet with them, and help as best we can. I think our national CEO said it best when he said, while others may create a focus group or something like that centered around an issue, we are already in their living rooms. Through the work of over 1,000 volunteers whom we call Vincentians, we are feeding over 10,000 people per month and served over 260,000 individuals last year alone, to the tune of nearly $5 million worth of assistance. And these are good and helpful outputs. But we need to understand how we can best help things like the 95% of our central neighborhood of Cleveland living at or below 200% of the poverty level. We have a food pantry there, but we can do more. So as we embark on the next 150 years, we seek a both-and approach, whereby we would both continue to fill these emergency needs for people and seek out systemic change to empower those we serve and to educate those who serve them. Natalie Shrimp from our office said it well in the City Club blog that if we are to ever end poverty in America, we must first understand it. To become a part of St. Vincent de Paul, to join, to donate, I encourage you to visit our website, svdpcle.org. Now, in Atlanta last year, as I sat at our Society of St. Vincent de Paul annual assembly, I knew within minutes, if not seconds, who I wanted to bring to Cleveland to begin or really continue this conversation. Dr. Donna Beagle was born into migrant labor poverty. Her family was helped by the Society of St. Vincent de Paul when she was young. She dropped out of school at age 15 to marry, and by age 25, she was divorced with 2 children, barely able to read a magazine, the only member of her family not to have been incarcerated. What followed, I imagine to the surprise of some, was self-confidence, a GED, an associate's in journalism, a bachelor's in communications, a master's in communication with a minor in gender studies, and completion of a doctorate degree in educational leadership. She's the author of See Poverty, Be the Difference, and Breaking Poverty Barriers to Equal Justice, and a couple more on the way. Dr. Beagle serves as president of Communication Across Barriers, a consulting firm dedicated to breaking poverty barriers. She speaks, writes, and trains across the nation to ensure authentic opportunities for people to move out of and stay out of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Dr. Donna Beagle.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I feel incredibly honored to stand on this stage, just learning a little bit of the history of City Club of Cleveland and how it plays the role of really bringing people together to have real honest dialogue about real issues in our community. Many people believe that they need to go abroad to fight poverty. How many of you know it's right here? It's right here. And how many of you know that we can do better? But we cannot do better in ignorance. So I do bring that perspective of having been born into generations of migrant labor poverty. My grandparents and my parents were cotton pickers, and my family would travel primarily Arizona, California, Oregon, and Washington, picking whatever grew. So everything from cherries, strawberries, moss, pine cones, bark. We worked that day for food that night. The deepest poverty in our country is generational poverty. And these are primarily folks who are workers of the land and highly mobile. I grew up in a world where when I would go to school, I didn't know the words that my teachers would use. And I would say, what does that word mean? And my teachers would say, you need to be a responsible, independent learner. Go look it up in the dictionary. So I would go to the dictionary and I would find 5 more words I didn't know. And that would be equated to my IQ. She's not very bright. She doesn't know these words. Not to, wow, she doesn't have a single human being in her life who knows those words. So when I went to the dictionary, inevitably I would find 4 or 5 more words that I didn't know. And it wasn't only the words that I didn't know the subject matter. I didn't understand the examples that my teachers were giving. Because where do human beings get their examples? From our own life experiences, right? So if you're from a middle-class environment, what examples are you giving when you explain something? So my teachers would explain the subject using a middle-class life experience. Well, everybody knows this. Well, we've all been here. Yeah, no. It'd be like if I put some Arabic up on a board and said, try harder. Come on, you can get this. You can get this. And not only did I not know the words or the subject matter or the experiences, I said ain't every other word. I didn't know when is it proper to say gone or went. How those people know when to say seen or saw. I didn't know I wasn't speaking middle class language, but I knew my whole life that people couldn't hear me because of the way I talked. Because don't we equate IQ with the way people talk? So one of the most important concepts I can share with you is to really think about the segregation in our communities, and I'm talking by social class. Now, Bush Sr. said, we don't have class in America. That's somewhere in Europe. I beg to differ. I beg to differ. I have 5 brothers, and I am the only family member who's not been incarcerated. And how many of you know that in America, we have more people in cages than any other country? There was a woman in my audience not too long ago who said, Dr. Beagle, I feel really uncomfortable when you say people in cages. And I said, I'm not going to pretty it up. You know, we change language, I think, sometimes to let us be okay. Like the federal government, a few years back, they changed hunger to food insecurity. I have a problem with that, having been hungry. If you've been hungry, I'm your sister. In my entire childhood, we would get evicted and we put everything we had in a storage shed. And then we couldn't afford the money to pay the storage bill. So they would auction off all of our things, including our family photos. How many of you know that's still going on today? You can go to almost any city in America and you can find storage companies auctioning off people's things, and they won't give them their family photos. So this is one of just a couple of photos I have of myself as a child. That's me and my younger brother, Steve. I'll never know. What did I look like as a little girl growing up? I'll never be able to pull out a picture and say, hey, to my kids, you look like me when I was your age. Things get taken away from you in poverty. And what poverty teaches you is that you need to not care, because caring's painful. So I learned not to care. And I also learned that people didn't care. I really believed that. How many of you have heard someone in poverty say, no one cares about people like us? Or if you talk to kids, they'll say, no one cares about kids like us. Because poverty teaches you that. I used to watch my mom and my dad. They would go into helping organizations to ask for help, and there'd be plastic or glass between them and the people. And a hole cut out of the glass that my mom was never tall enough to speak through. And as a kid, I'd be thinking, why don't you talk to us face to face? Why don't you get to know our names? Why don't you find out what's going on in our communities, in our families? Why is this okay? And far too often, what would happen is people would say, well, here's a 3-day box of emergency food, and please remember, you can't come back for a month. So most of my family members make an X for their name. How many of you know there's people right here in this community that cannot read and write? I was on a plane not too long ago, and a man said to me, there are no more illiterate people in America. I tried to get him to come to my house for a karaoke party so he could meet a few. We have 44 million people who can't read and write. And what kind of jobs are you going to get if you're not literate or functionally literate? I mean, the kind of jobs we had. Temporary, seasonal, jobs you work that day for food that night. Jobs where you don't get treated with respect. Jobs where you never see anybody move up. Because we have this belief system in our country that if you work hard, you will. Bureau of Labor statistics say, no, you won't. It's the exception of the person who doesn't have a skill or an education that moves up in our labor market. Actually, labor statistics show if a person takes a job and they have high school or less, and they're not skilled, like electrician or plumber or some of those jobs that can pay a living wage, they can work for 10 years. And on average, they, after 10 years of working hard physical labor, receive $2 more an hour. I mean, how many of you know people working at McDonald's 10 years and they're still not making it? You don't move up. So poverty teaches you that no one cares. Poverty teaches you there's no one to help. Poverty teaches you that you don't have any power. I mean, you can make choices all day long, but if you ain't got gas, you ain't getting there. And the housing that we could get, when we had housing, I spent pretty much 28 years of my life homeless. The kind of houses we could get were condemned or should have been. But we were so grateful to get them. My dad would stand out there and say, "Oh, don't worry, the roof's falling in, or there's no plumbing, or we're just so happy you'll rent to us, and we're handy. We'll fix it." Who in here's tried to remodel? What are we going to do? We're going to duct tape it. And then we're going to move. Or we're going to move because we're making choices between rent and food, and the electric bill is so high. How many people in this community get their electricity shut off on a daily basis? How many people in this community get their water shut off on a daily basis? You know, United Nations declared water a basic human right, and yet in our wealthy country, we shut it off daily. So then we say to people, well, just because you're poor, you don't have to be dirty. Or we say, why do you have all that garbage piled up out there? My family, we would try to take the garbage down to an apartment complex and put it in the dumpster there, and we'd get caught, and they would fine us. So then my mom's Dunkin' Donut check is going to pay the fine. There are reasons behind the behavior we see. There are reasons behind every behavior that make complete and total sense when we understand poverty. When we do what President Johnson said. President Johnson was the president who did it right. He said, we're going to fight the poverty, not the people who live in it. And he said all children should have preschool and develop the Head Start program, which works. It's a model that works, but it's often underfunded, and the staff are underpaid and overworked. He said, we need people in the community with their boots on the ground, helping people to remove the obstacles that poverty presents. So he created community action. Community action works because it takes that both-and approach that John was talking about. It's not just about helping people to cope with their poverty conditions. Our efforts have to be focused on how do we assist people to move out and to stay out of that crisis condition that is stealing phenomenal human potential. We don't know the human potential. Do you know that majority of people in cages in our country can't read at an 8th grade level? Half have untreated mental health issues. How do we address mental health in our nation? We can all just say it together. We don't. So what I learned was the issue wasn't that people didn't care. And the way I learned that, I got to the University of Portland. I was 28 years old at University of Portland. And it was my first time being around people who were making it. And I saw them doing some really caring behaviors. I saw them volunteering at battered women's shelters, giving away clothing, food, time, money. And I thought, wow, it looks like they care. So then my next thought was, if they care, why aren't they doing something? And so I began having conversations with people at the university about poverty. And it became crystal clear. They cared. And that was a pivotal moment in my life. Mother Teresa says, to believe your fellow human beings do not care is more painful than hunger. And I agree. And the segregation and divisions in our community perpetuate that belief. So to learn that they really cared was huge. But the same time I learned that, I realized they cared, but they didn't have a clue. They could no more describe my life in generational poverty context than I could talk about middle class norms and middle class life experiences. Like one of my first speeches 26 years ago was to the largest law firm in the Northwest. And they had asked me to come in and talk about communicating and relating more effectively with clients who live in poverty. So this was 26 years ago, so it's not me now. My knees were knocking. I was a nervous wreck. So I showed up downtown Portland, Oregon, building overlooking the water, beautiful building. And I'm thinking, they're not going to let me in there, because my family couldn't even get a bathroom key. So I stepped in the building and nobody threw me out. I was like feeling pretty good, took my seat, and I tell you, attorneys eat pretty well. Somebody came by and said, by the way, we're having a buffet lunch. And I'm like, oh my gosh, food too? And one of the ironies of my life today is I can find a free meal almost any day of the week. But when I needed one, when I was 2 cents short buying milk, guess what? You don't get it. I go into privilege stores and there's a cup of money sitting there saying, take some pennies if you need them, take a dime, a quarter. That's not how it is in deep poverty, in working class poverty, in immigrant poverty. And everybody's out of salt and butter. There's no one to ask. So I got my food. I was eating and feeling like I was on cloud 9. I'm here in this building. These attorneys, several hundred attorneys, going to listen to me who said ain't every other word. And they're paying me to talk. I was kind of like my mom back then, because she's always like, I'd be like, Mom, I'm so tired after giving a speech. And she'd say, how can you be tired? You're just talking. See, to a grape cutting cotton picker, this isn't work. So I'm eating my food, and I'm almost done before my head looks up, and I look around and realize not another human being in that room is eating. And I don't know why. So I start looking for social cues, like, okay, what's going on? Is this candid camera? What? I don't get it. Why aren't people? I finally lean over to this attorney. I said, how come people aren't eating their food? And she said, oh, we wait till everyone gets a plate before we eat. Mortified. I'm chewing my food. It's nearly my plate's empty. And I'm thinking in my mind, who told you that? Would you mind sharing it with the class? I'm not stupid. I can get this stuff, but somebody needs to state the obvious. Because what's normal in the middle class world would not work in my context. I have 5 brothers. I live in deep poverty. If I waited for everyone to get a plate, what do you think would happen? You aren't getting any, and if you do get some, it's not anything anybody would want. So I did learn that people did care, and I learned they didn't know. I learned we didn't even have a clear definition of poverty. I started talking to people about poverty, and they'd say, well, I grew up poor. One guy said, I was doing my doctoral work, and I wanted to interview people who grew up in generations of poverty who were able to achieve bachelor's degrees, because I couldn't find their voices in the literature. So this guy said, I'll do your study for you. I grew up poor. And I said, thank you so much. Will you tell me, how did your family get by? He said, well, my father was a physician. This is an actual quote. He said he died, I was 12 years old. My family had to go live with grandparents. I worked in their store, pulled myself up, and I became a doctor like my dad. And I'm listening to him through the lived experiences of generational poverty, through fighting my 5 brothers for the back window of the car, because that's certainly the best place to sleep. You can see the stars and there's no feet in your face. And I'm thinking, you knew someone who owned a store? And you were related to them? That's not poverty. But look at it from his lived experience, situational poverty. You know, he's not thinking, we compare ourselves to the people around us. So if you grow up with people around you who had more, it's highly likely you internalize you grew up poor. People say, well, we were poor, we had nothing but a farm. Like, you own land? Now, all of these different life experiences are painful, but they're different. And that's the key to fighting poverty, is to understand there are many different life experiences of poverty. So imagine this guy whose father was a physician. What would having a father who's a physician, even if you just had him 12 years, do for your vocabulary? Your exposure to possibilities, your networks of support, your stability, your inheritance. We don't consider our taken for granted advantages. Like one of my taken for granted advantages, which I don't take for granted because I'm quite aware of my privileges and why I get to stand here. I'm the only girl with 5 brothers. So I got all of the messages from society that I didn't look right. I didn't talk right. I didn't have my clothes all came from clothing closets in super high poverty communities. Guess what they look like by the time they get there? Their clothes you'll be made fun of and be beat up for, which I was many times. I remember being a 7th grader telling a teacher, I don't want to go outside. They fight out there. And the teacher said, nothing I can do. You need to go outside. I got work to do. So I went outside. I was beat up, my hair falling out by the handfuls. No one cares. It's the only conclusion you can come to. And people will say, well, why do they have attitude? Why are they so angry? My brother Melvin married a woman named Matilda. And she grew up in deeper poverty than we did because she didn't have my mom. And she was diabetic, the kind you have to use injections when they married. And she was on welfare. She had 3 children. And when she married my brother, she lost her medical card. So she began reusing her needles, stretching out the medicine. Had a massive heart attack at 35, paralyzed her on one side of her body. She got a pacemaker. My brother is earning minimum wage. He has 7 teeth, says ain't every other word. And he comes to me and he said, Donna, I have to divorce my wife. I don't want to divorce my wife. It's the only damn way I can get her health care. And so they divorced and they began living together. But in the state they lived in, which was Washington State, they had a law saying if you marry somebody with children, you become financially liable for those children until they're 18. So the state started garnishing the wages, 25% of his minimum wage. So they got evicted. They end up living in their car. Now he's got an invalid. Why is he so angry? Why does he have attitude? There's a reason for these things. So I began studying where do people learn about poverty, and I realized really quickly that we were graduating people from college without Poverty 101, without a fundamental understanding of the history of poverty. I've literally, in 26 years, I've asked thousands of judges, lawyers, doctors, health professionals, social service workers, educators, faith-based organizations, business leaders. How many of you have had the course History of Poverty, United States of America? I never see a hand. And if we don't know our history, what is that saying? Doomed to repeat it. Most people don't even know we had a war on poverty. And the few who do, they'll go, it was a war we couldn't win. We were winning. We were winning. When we began investing in our people, investing in excellent access to resources and opportunities, poverty was reduced by 23%, the highest ever in the history of our country, right at that time when Johnson declared war on poverty. And then they pulled all the resources out of the war on poverty and put it into the war in Vietnam. And we haven't, as a nation, addressed poverty since. I mean, our biggest effort to address poverty in our country is the Earned Income Tax Credit. Guess who doesn't file taxes? So what I started learning was we're graduating people from college to be social workers, psychiatrists, elected officials, and they have no foundational understanding of even the word, no meaning, clear meaning. The federal government says you need about $24,000 a year if you're a family of 4 to live. Are there any families of 4 in here? Would anyone be willing to testify under oath that $24,000 won't take care of your family? Yeah. It's because we're using a 1960s cost of living to measure what a family needs in 2015. Doesn't include childcare, healthcare, or transportation costs. If you did that, if you added those in, it'd be about 48,000, and that wouldn't get you a trip to Hawaii. That's just basics. We have a housing crisis in our communities. HUD does a housing affordability study every year. Every year they report, last 15 years, nowhere a person earning minimum wage, living on subsistence welfare, or receiving disability can afford even a modest 2-bedroom apartment. We have families living in storage sheds, cars, campers, and they're coming into our schools. It's impacting our communities in a big way. Martin Luther King said, if you don't talk about poverty, if you don't talk about race, you're going to have racism. I say if you don't talk about poverty, you're going to have continuation of loss of human potential in your community. So I began working to help create a deeper understanding of poverty, because most of the people who speak and train in this nation on poverty haven't lived it. And they look in at people through the middle class eyes. You know, my parents never went to a school conference. What do we say about those parents? They don't care, right? My mom would say, I ain't going in there to make a fool out of myself. Those people want to talk about school. What's the point of me going in there? If one educator had ever come to my mom and said, tell me about Larry, Melvin, Rick, Wayne, Steve, or Donna, I could promise you I would feel sorry for that person because she'd still be talking. Pride and joy. And her biggest dream for her kids is that we would all learn to sweep and mop. Because, see, parents can only teach their kids what they've been exposed to. I never knew a soul who benefited from education. I never knew anybody who used education to earn a living. I thought everybody grew up like me, because in America we say everybody starts the same. I was 26 years old and I got into a pilot program in Portland, Oregon, and 4 middle-class women told their life stories. It was my first time hearing middle-class persons speak about their life. And I'm sitting there 26 years old saying, you lived in one house your whole childhood? You guys didn't get evicted? You never been hungry? You had credit? Car insurance? And pretty soon my mind was just spinning, and I'm thinking, well, no wonder you get to be on that side of the table. And that was the moment when I could finally write in my little brown diary, I'm going to try to get that GED they've been talking about. Then maybe I'll be somebody. Because poverty teaches you you're not. So we have to help people to understand they're not the cause of poverty. Poverty is real. There's real causes. Affordable housing, living wage jobs, access to nutrition. If you're on food stamps, you get $1.47 per meal. People will say there's not hunger in America, there's obesity, which shows our ignorance about what you can buy. You're going to buy the quick, the easy, the fast. And once in a while, you get what those people have, because you want to be somebody too. So all of my studies, I went from GED at age 26 to doctorate, and all of my studies centered around how do we fight that evil villain poverty? How do we make sure that we're separating the people from the poverty and actually meeting people where they are? I was on welfare in 1986. I had 2 children. We were homeless. My welfare check, we became homeless. First, though, we were living in a house, and I got the welfare check. It was $408. My rent was $395. And I had $13 left, and people would say, if you be responsible, save some money, we have this great program, we'll match what you save. Or they'd say, we're not going to give your kids a scholarship to go to camp because we believe parents need some skin in the game. There's no research to prove that if you pay for something, you value it more. Did you know that? How many people in this room have bought a gym membership and didn't go? So learning about poverty is such an incredibly critical piece of the many life experiences of poverty. I'm the only girl in my family. While society taught me that I didn't fit, in my family, guess how I was treated? With 5 brothers being the only girl, guess how I was treated? You can all say queen. I was queen. We moved into a 1-bedroom house, 23 people. Guess who got the bedroom? Queen. Resiliency theory says when a human being is treated special, it gives them a shield against those negative, harsh messages that poverty teaches. Resiliency theory isn't resiliency isn't something you're born with. It comes from how people treat you. And how do we talk to people? You ever listen to the tone of voice or what's on the walls where people are served? So you internalize that and you come to believe that all there is welfare. Today, a welfare check for one adult, 2 children. Remember, mine was $408 in 1986. The national average today is $478. That's for a family of 3. And people believe that people are getting rich off welfare. They're getting rich by having babies on welfare. We buy into the stereotypes because the number one teacher of poverty is not the university, it's the media. How many of you agree with me? Media dramatize just a little. So the reason I get to stand here today is because someone exactly like you took the time to get to know me. Someone exactly like you was relentless and persistent. Someone exactly like you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, introduced me to more people, helped me connect to resources and opportunities so that I could start to see that there was something else, that I did have something to offer, that I wasn't stupid because I believed I was. I had a professor at the University of Portland who studied language and social class his whole career. He said, I want to help you learn a second language. And I said, what? He said, Donna, middle-class people use a very specific sentence structure. They talk about topics that they're around every day and use vocabulary that's been used around them since they were in the womb. You can't know this stuff unless you're exposed to it. So he began helping me. And today I am bilingual. I speak fluent middle-class language. The ripple effects of my education on my family have been profound. I have 2 brothers now that have bachelor's degrees, including one brother who spent most of his life in a cage. Poverty doesn't always allow you to be good. I have multiple cousins who grew up living in cars with parents who make X's for their name, entering graduate school. One cousin came to live with me at 15. She could not read. Took her 4 years to get her associates. Then she got her bachelor's, her master's. I got a text recently. Yikes, I've been accepted into the doctoral program. The potential in your community is phenomenal. My son, Daniel, whose dad dropped out of 7th grade, also migrant labor family. He said to me when he entered high school, Mom, I want to try golf. Can you all figure out I'm not from a golfing family? I didn't even know you needed 2 clubs. I mean, more than 1 club. I didn't know. So I got 1 club at a secondhand store, and I bought a bag of golf balls. And this kid spent 6 months hitting balls into a bean pan in our front yard. And then because of who I know, now let's be honest, right? We live in a world where it's who you know. Because of who I know at this time in my life, my son goes to a very privileged school that has a golf team. He gets on. He scores 13th in state his first year. Comes home after doing so well. He says, Mom, I have figured out what I want to do for a living. I said, what, Daniel? He said, Mom, I'm going to design golf. I'm going to do landscape architecture, design golf courses. And this is what I said to my son. Is that a real job? Because in poverty, you don't know possibilities. You don't know possibilities. So I'm going to close with my one and only poem. And I think it brings together the pieces that I've been sharing with you today. I'm going to encourage you to continue your learning. Visit my website. There's articles, there's books, there's materials on there. They are all from the perspectives of people who have lived poverty. So you get that inside perspective of what's really going on in generational, working class, immigrant, situational poverty, mixed class poverty, so that we hear their voices. Because it is only through hearing their voices we can take action. I'm going to also encourage you to get involved with St. Vincent de Paul, City Club, any venue you can find where you can bring these issues to the forefront so that we are addressing it right here where poverty lives. The poem is called Curious. I find myself more late with every crisis, more angry with every injustice, more greedy with every deprivation, more rude with every judgment, more disorganized with every eviction, more negative with every untreated illness, more unstable with every insecurity. I find myself more civil with every single bite, more respectful with every kindness, more hopeful with every chance, more grateful with every opportunity, more motivated when there's actual hope, more happy when I'm wanted and valued. I find myself like the 47 million people living in poverty, responding in very human ways to my environment. I cannot thank you enough for taking your time today to focus on this huge issue. We have to say the P word. Poverty is right here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring Dr. Donna Beagle, President of Communication Across Barriers. We encourage you to organize questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. If you are joining us via our radio broadcast or webcast and would like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via the radio broadcast and web stream provided by our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Production, distribution, and broadcast of the City Club programs are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Be sure to join us on Wednesday, December 9th for a conversation with Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine on some of the most pressing issues facing Ohio today. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Our hospitality partner for today's forum is the Metropolitan at the 9 Hotel. Thank you for your support. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Center for Families and Children and the Council for Economic Opportunities in Greater Cleveland. We thank all of you for your support. Lastly, we welcome students to today's forum from Cleveland Central Catholic High School, Facing History New Tech High School, Jane Addams Business Careers Center, John F. Kennedy High School, Hawkins School, Solon High School, and St. Edward High School. Student participation is made possible by the Mary Jane Spar and Charles E. Spar Charitable Trust. Will the students please stand and be recognized? Now, it's time to return to Dr. Beagle for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are Director of Programming Stephanie Jansky and Content Associate Teddy Eisenberg. First question, please.
Yes, ma'am. Can you please talk about immigrant poverty for just a moment?
Absolutely. So one of the types of poverty that I talk about is immigrant poverty. So in addition to hunger, not being able to afford a place to live, affordability of childcare, transportation, people who immigrate often struggle with cultural barriers, language barriers, and discrimination based on their race or ethnicity. So those are two barriers that people face that prevent them from developing their potential. One really great thing that you'll see when in the United States, we're the only country, and Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he talks about this. He says in the United States, because you do not educate about real causes of poverty, you're the only country that teaches your people they're the cause. So when you go to developing countries, you don't hear people saying, make better choices, work harder. There's a clear honesty about real structural causes of poverty. So you may meet people who have nothing, but they have their sense of self. They have their confidence, and they're taught that America is the land of opportunity. So when people immigrate here, they arrive with the four-letter word, hope. And hope is really the wings for grabbing an opportunity. So often you'll see people who immigrate do better in our schools and in our workplace than people who are born into poverty here because they haven't internalized that poverty as a personal deficiency, at least not for the first generation. But if they're here more than a generation, they too start getting messages. Why don't you have the right shoes? Why don't you live in the right neighborhood? Why don't you have the right parent? Whatever. So they too take that in. So we've got just windows when people arrive. And really to keep that hope and build on that and help people develop their potential.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to Cleveland and helping us understand
My
what you've
honor.
focused on so much. What do you think explains the inability for society to talk about poverty? For example, Democrat, Republican, in political debate, there seems to be an avoidance of the term, and you use the euphemism that's been used. What causes that? Why was Lyndon Johnson the blip on the screen, the war on poverty? What keeps us from being able to talk about what is so present?
Well, another compliment to City Club of Cleveland. Aristotle and Plato said that when you get more ideas on the table, you reach greater solutions. So I teach that poverty is not a Democrat or Republican issue, and nor is it a Mormon or a Catholic issue. It's a very human issue, and we all need to come to the table. However, it's a very sensitive issue. It's a sensitive issue like race. So it brings up things for so many people. And when you've got no ability for people to get the kind of education they need, a foundational understanding of poverty, a definition, understanding the different types of poverty, how did we get to our current ideas about poverty, the policies that we develop, we don't have people that are there. So I do intensive poverty institutes, and I train people to be embedded poverty coaches within their organization. So my goal is to create an army of certified poverty-informed coaches that can help in communities so that we are separating the people from the poverty and we are able to really fight the true causes of poverty, and they can bring it up in ways where it's not blame and judgment. I've had people say to me, "Oh my gosh, Dr. Beagle, I'm a teacher, and for 25 years I've treated people that way. I've thought those things about people in poverty." And I say, how could you not? We don't teach this stuff. You can't just know it. We need to get poverty informed.
Thank you for coming. My question for you, about 10 years ago, Harvard sociologist Orlando Patterson wrote an article, Poverty of Mind, addressing the black male achievement gap. Could you speak a little to your research about how the poverty of mind also maybe affects children and students, even in urban and suburban areas, if you have any?
So my master's degree is communication, and I pay really a close attention to language, like how do we describe people in poverty. So I'll teach like what comes to your mind when you hear the homeless. I did that with graduate students, and they said dirty, lazy, drug addicts, drunks. And I said, okay, what comes to your mind when I say people without homes? And they said, oh, lost their jobs, had a fire, got sick. All of a sudden they were clear, and all I did was put the people back in, what's happened because the media are a number one teacher of poverty is we've dehumanized people in poverty. Another thing that's happened is we have confused issues of racism and poverty. They're usually seen as one. So what I teach is that we're all the same species. I have the privilege of presenting to people. I don't speak their language. I trained the entire justice system in Trinidad and Tobago, and presented in Ireland and Paris and China, and people will take my hands and say through an interpreter, "You're my sister." And what we have in common are those human impacts of poverty. So the poverty of mind, I'm very cautious about that language, because just change your mind becomes the thinking after that language. So I get concerned about that. But certainly, if people internalize that somehow they're deficient because of their race, ethnicity, or because of the experiences of poverty, they're going to feel hopeless. So we have to start there. We have to start by showing people that they know a lot, helping them understand that they're not stupid. I was doing a faculty in-service, and a professor said, when I send graduate students out to work with people in poverty, I have to remind them they're not very bright. And I did my speech, and I said, so all of you are professors, right? So how many of you know how to fix a choke on a car using a carrot? I can. Does that mean you're not bright? You know, we know a lot. So it's when we focus on what's wrong with people, that deficit approach, we fail to see their strengths. And that happens both because of race and because of poverty. They're two issues, huge issues, that prevent people from developing their potential.
What are the best ways that teens can actually help fight against poverty?
I could not be happier to see all of these young people here, because you're a voice and you have an opportunity to really pay attention to this in your studies. I wrote a piece for CNN, a CNN blog called Every K-12 Student Should Have Poverty 101. Because if you're not in poverty, it gives you the ability to understand your peers who are. I mean, the second biggest cause of people dropping out is being made fun of for their clothes, their hair, their shoes, the peer pressure, peer ridicule. So I think getting informed, I think there's lots of room for young people in organizations like Community Action, St. Vincent de Paul. There's lots of room to get in there and get directly involved, but I encourage you to make a friend. Make a friend. If you go to a privileged school, take time to go to the schools that aren't privileged and see if you can help out. One school, I spoke to 2,000 really privileged kids, and they took on the schools in their community who weren't so privileged and helped them to go on field trips. They raised funds for them to go on field trips. It could be as simple as that. It could be simple as saying hi to someone who no one else says hi to, because that being noticed, Maslow, who teaches us about human need, we need to belong. And when you reach out, that helps me feel like I belong. So I can't encourage you enough to get more information. There's a book called The Lies My Teacher Told Me. In that book, there's a chapter on social class, and it's a really nice one for students to read, to really get to thinking about the history. So thank you all for being here and taking the time to be here.
Hi. I represent the Community Action Agency in Cuyahoga County, so thank you so much for being here and really talking about the war on poverty. My question for you, as you mentioned earlier, being able to see it before you became it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Say that one more time. Being able to
see your future before you.
Yeah. So when poverty steals your self-confidence, your self-esteem, your hope, what you do is you subsist. My whole focus was on making it through the day. We were going to figure out a way to make it through the day. It was never, what are we going to do next week? What are we going to do next? It was all about making it through the day. So for me to realize that, and I bought into that, I mean, that belief that everybody starts the same, I thought everyone was born to parents who were not literate. I thought everybody got evicted, everybody went hungry. So it was realizing that they had different possibilities and exposure, and that they weren't better than me. And that was when I could feel like, oh, maybe I could do that. When I was getting close to finishing my bachelor's degree, people said, you know, Donna, you could get a master's degree. And I was like, no way, that is for smart people. And they said, no, Donna, you could get a master's degree. And my counselor at the time said, Donna, you're at the University of Portland, you have a 3.91 GPA. How could you have that if you weren't smart? And I said, my professors like me. And he said, well, they're not going to jeopardize their careers for you. But that wasn't enough. What it took was me meeting people who had master's degrees and having conversations with them and realizing that they were just people. They were better than me. I'd talk to people for a few minutes and I'd say, so what do you do? Oh, I have a master's in whatever. And I would say, talk to them for a few minutes and say, well, you have a master's degree. All right then. I can get a master's degree. And that's kind of how my family are. You know, they're like, Donna did it? We can do that. You know, because they know I'm not perfect. And I think we have to demystify that idea that to be a lawyer, to be an engineer, to be a doctor means that you're perfect, that you don't make mistakes or that you don't have to learn. Some people are good at some things and others are good at other things. So I think it's helping people to connect across these divides. United, we can fight poverty together. Divided, we fight each other.
It's a common misconception that if you're born into poverty, you're going to continue being in poverty. So how would you suggest that children who are in poverty now get out of like the shadow of the poverty that their parents are in now?
Well, it's not a misconception. It's actually statistically true. If you're born into the deepest poverty like I was, there's about an 83% chance you were stuck there unless your community steps up and breaks down those divides. So the kids can't do it themselves. And kids are going to do what the parents do. We like to beat the parents up. And what I teach is my parents taught me everything they knew. They didn't know how to get out of poverty. They didn't know education was for people like us. They taught me everything they knew. So it's the segregation and division where the kids never see anybody or develop a meaningful connection with people who use education to earn a living. You know, the definition of a role model is somebody I can be like. If you're better than me, smarter than me, how could I be like you? What's the point of me trying? And the other thing we do to young people in poverty, if they start to make it, is we, as a society, we place the burden on those folks to take care of the whole family. So they, they end up having to, the mom's out of milk and they get their financial aid, or the brother's lights are shut off and they make a few dollars, and so what do? Because in poverty, and there was a longitudinal study released showing that people who live in the crisis of poverty are more likely to give than people who have. They're more likely to stop and help you. They're more likely to invite you in. So a lot of folks will say, I had to sever all my ties with my family to move out. And that's what a lot of middle-class researchers teach. I teach the opposite. You got to bring your family along. If it's in your hands to help you, do it. And if it's too much for you, you start thinking about who you've been introduced to and then who they know. And then you start thinking about whose job is it to remove that obstacle so that you're not tearing families apart. I think that's a critical piece.
Question from Twitter that we're going to ask. They want to know, can you share your perspective on the role of race and racism in poverty?
Okay, so it's similar to the other question, but so let me give you an example of this. If you just imagine a human being, what's inside all human beings? You're supposed to say a skeleton. What do all human beings need? We need certain things. In order to exist, we have to eat, right? We need safety, shelter, those basic fundamental human things. So no matter what your color, you need those things. My best friend in the whole world is a man named Sharif Abdullah. Who can guess he's not a white guy? And people will say, what do you have in common with Sharif? He's 10 years older than you. He's male. He's African American. He grew up on the other side of the country in Camden, New Jersey. Well, what Sharif and I have in common is generational poverty. He spent about 38 years of his life pretty much homeless, and I spent about 28 years of my life pretty much homeless. So when I'm in conversation with Sharif, I don't have to explain things to him that I do to people who haven't had that lived experience. So I told Sharif, hey, Sharif, I got some middle-class friends who want me to go camping. What do you think? And he's like, oh, yeah, leave the warm bed. Go sleep on the ground. Woohoo! He knows. We were never homeless. We were always camping. He knows what it's like to be out of salt and butter. That we finish each other's sentence. Now, Sharif will also tell you what it's like to have somebody cross the street and not want to walk on the same side because he's African American. And he'll tell you what it's like to have somebody not think he has anything to say and talk over the top of him because he's African American. So Sharif's website is commonway.org, and he is one of the finest inclusivity trainers we have in our nation. He speaks all over the world, but he's incredible. He went on to get a law degree because same reasons that I made it. Someone believed in him. When people make it out of poverty, they don't usually cite a program. They will cite people who went out of their way above and beyond and did not give up on them. And that's what I found in my doctoral research. It was people who were able to mentor and navigate people to move out and stay out of poverty. People who were willing to step outside of their comfort zone and actually take the time to see through the other person's eyes instead of judging. Portland State University has a brand new building. The School of Social Work has been in the basement for 30 years, and it was named in my honor, which I still haven't quite come to terms with. But I'm very proud. The donor said this is going to be the penthouse for people who have their feet working on the ground. And it is. It overlooks the city of Portland. And I'm also proud that my cousin Wanda, who is my graphic designer, her mom makes the X for her name. She designed the interior. So when you walk in, it says, believe people can make it out of poverty. If you don't, they probably won't. It says if you're judging, you cannot connect. If you cannot connect, you cannot communicate. If you cannot communicate, we cannot eradicate poverty. So suspending judgment requires us to know more, to get the facts, and to reach out to people who live in that war zone of poverty. Thank you. Thank you.
Brief commercial, but we can start a student group at any one of these high schools and others throughout the Northeast Ohio area. We've started our first over at St. Edward High School, and we'd be happy to engage. I'll be there on Monday. Just let me know where and when. Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday forum with Dr. Donna Beagle, President of Communication Across Barriers. Thank you, Dr. Beagle. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.